You're listening to the Apple and Biscuit Show with Jason Nicholas and Dr. Neil Hillman.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to this edition of the Apple and Biscuit Show. I'm Dr. Neil Hillman.
And I'm Jason Nicholas.
As our regular listener will know by now, Jason and I are audio professionals who for decades have worked in the sound for moving picture sector, and these days that's mainly as dialogue editors and mixers in post-production. But we both also have academic backgrounds that directly inform our work, mine from research in how human emotions are affected by sound, and Jason with a scholarly interest in human ecology and psychology.
And so with those backgrounds in the mix, we hope that the content of our podcast and the guests who join us will prove enlightening to anyone with an interest in filmmaking, regardless of their level of experience. Maybe you're a student just embarking on your studies, an industry newcomer, or you're already an experienced professional. Maybe you just love movies. Wherever you join us from, you're welcome along.
Our guest today is a familiar name to many in the pro-audio sector, Russ Hughes. In 2008, Russ founded Production Expert, a group of blogs for music and audio post-production professionals with an objective of providing practitioners with free access to high-quality online content. And his foresight certainly bore fruit, because over the last decade, Production Expert has become the leading audio industry website, with over 7 million visitors annually.
But before Production Expert, Russ spent the 1980s as a synth programmer for many top artists, and then spent several decades writing and recording music before going on to spend time in senior positions at post-production houses based in London's Soho district, at one time the UK's film and television capital. 5 years ago, in 2021, Production Expert ran a global income survey of freelance audio and post professionals, and the results were sobering. A large share of respondents were earning very little, retirement planning was weak, and healthcare costs were cutting deeply into real income for many, particularly in the United States.
Last month, Production Expert ran the same core survey again, and at first glance, and 5 years on, the numbers look stronger. Income bands have shifted upward, more respondents report pension provision, and fewer sit at the very bottom of the earning scale. Russ, welcome to the show. Are you well, and where in the world do we find you?
I am in Bangor, which is the Northern Irish Bangor, just outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, on the coast. Yes, I'm well, although having listened to the introduction for you, Per, I feel slightly inferior this morning because I don't have any professorships or stuff like that. I'm just a bog-standard practitioner.
Well, we're going to get some interesting stuff from you, I know, today. So, for listeners who might not know, Russ, can you briefly describe your role at Production Expert and how it places you in a great place to observe these industry trends firsthand?
Yeah, sure. I am I think they call me the CEO, and it's a small team. So it's not like ICI kind of CEO, but I'm the guy that started it and then over years have stepped back from it because I also have a role in an agency called Sociotech, which helps brands in this sector to communicate with audio professionals. And my role over the years for Production Expert, and still is to some degree, is a leadership role, helping us to make sure that we're still relevant for the sector, and that has meant over the years reinventing ourselves. And I often say that leadership is a bit like if you set off from London in a liner heading for Rio, and if you don't turn the wheel, then you probably end up in somewhere like South Africa. And so my job over the years has just been those little taps on the wheel now and again to make sure we're still heading in the right direction. Got an amazing team, got an incredible operations manager called Mel, who basically makes sure we don't do anything silly, make sure that all my ideas come to fruition, and just looks after the rest of the team. And Mike, my co-founder, Mike Thornton, many will know of as well through his work in various guises under things like loudness and noise reduction seminars he's done. So Mike's retired now, tried to be retired, but he still ends up writing for the blog. So we've got a really great team of about 50, 60 contributors who write for the blog. And the great thing about that is I've always been very clear about a number of things for the blog. One, as you mentioned at the start, Neil, it's free. Because when you want help, normally you can't afford it. So in nearly 20 years now, because it's 2008, it'll be our 20th anniversary in 2 years' time, we've managed to maintain that. And the way we maintain that is we have brands that partner with us and support us and enable us to carry on writing content. And the second thing is that a lot of our contributors, and Neil, you've been one over the years, are practitioners, because I think professionals need to know that the people who are writing about this understand and empathise with the roles that they're in. And so I've always made that very clear as well. So this isn't some kind of team of just people trying to write content just to get clicks. It really is people who care about this dearly and want to make sure that we're supporting the industry as best we can.
So, what prompted Production Expert to run this exact same survey again 5 years later? Was there a specific moment or trend that you'd witnessed that made you feel it was crucial to update the 2021 snapshot?
Well, a number of things, I think. The first thing is that 2021 was pretty bang on in the middle of COVID. And what COVID did around the world was it skewed figures. It skewed numbers in all sorts of ways. It skewed spending numbers in the industry because many people had to go home and work from home. So the industry saw unprecedented growth in terms of spend on gear. And it saw a lot of people reevaluating how they worked. So once people got home, they thought, actually, this is quite a nice thing to do, to work from home like this. So I think that was a secondary thing. It's that COVID did that for a lot of us in the industry. Third, some people were forced basically to go home because COVID made companies as well reevaluate their staffing and their cost base and realise that if they could do this without a building, then they'd carry on doing it without a building. And also, we have been through, again, unprecedented things in the last few years, cost of living crisis. We've been through 2 strikes with the scriptwriters' strike. And just a lot of different things happened. And we thought at 5 years, it was a good time to take a temperature and see what was happening. And the final thing I wanted to say, which I think we mentioned in the results of the news survey, is we'd changed our focus. In the 5 years between the surveys, we had really sharpened our focus to really only serve professionals. Previously, we'd served professionals and enthusiasts and stuff like that. But we felt the enthusiast market was already overserved by people like Instagrammers and YouTubers and stuff like that. We felt we wanted to just go deeper rather than wider. So we really did as much as we could just to serve the professionals. And what that did was it meant a lot of the people who had originally done the survey in terms of sector type or in terms of where they were in their career naturally would have fallen away. So we wanted to see what it looked like now. And so there was a number of reasons, and those are them.
Do you know how many of the respondents from the first survey were also part of the second one?
We don't get granular for the simple reason we think that anonymizing a survey, especially about income, I don't know if it's the same all over the world, but Neil would attest to this. Talking about what you earn in the UK is kind of like it's not good dinner party conversation. In fact, some parts of the UK it's positively frowned upon. It's quite awkward. So we've always wanted to give people. We felt that the best freedom would be to anonymise the survey, so we weren't able to capture any kind of that data.
Yeah, I know. And things like when you ask direct questions of people, I think in this industry especially, we all tend to say, oh, I've got something in the works. You know, there's always, oh, I'm doing this, I will be doing this. And perhaps with an anonymous survey, it's a bit more honest.
Well, I'd had a conversation about a month before with a top guy who'd won an Emmy on a film, but had a year without work. And he said part of the problem was, he said he had this balancing act between letting people know he was available for work, but at the same time not looking like he wasn't in work, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. But he said he had to create this illusion that he was still useful. He had to create this illusion that he was still wanted. And he said that was a strain on him. He was now living off savings and stuff like that. And as a guy, he'd just won an Emmy 3 years ago for a top TV show, sorry.
We're all doing this, Russ. We're all doing it.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's just mad that you have to do that you have to pretend that you're still current.
Yeah, I think to be idle in this industry is deadly. And, it seems like your skills aren't current, et cetera, et cetera. The headline, I guess, of the whole survey is that income bands have shifted upward and the lowest earners are fewer. But your core argument is that this is not the same as real growth. For professional listening, can you break down the gap between nominal income and real income in today's economy?
Sure. Well, over the last 5 years, because of the cost of energy and then energy is almost the core feeder for inflation, because then if energy prices go up, then food production goes up, farming goes up, all these different things. So, for example, Ukraine is a huge producer of fertilizers. So that's why farming costs go up and then food costs go up. And so the compound inflationary numbers are over 20% over that 5-year period, which is mind-blowing to think about. So you have to earn over 20% more income to stand still. That's the first headline piece of data here. Plus the cost of healthcare in healthcare cost countries. And I'm really fortunate to live in the UK where it's free healthcare. And there are some people that live in countries like that. But I think in the US, the compound number again is about 14% up in that period for healthcare costs. Everything's got more expensive across the board, whether it's your pension payment, your mortgage, your food. So to stand still, you have to earn a considerable amount, a fifth more to stand still. So if we'd said from the number, everybody's earning 20% more than they were 5 years ago, that sounds like a great piece of news. But then you add into that first these inflationary numbers, but second you add into that is the uncertainty in the industry, which seems to be worse than ever. So a lot more people in our industry now are seeing considerable gaps in work between job to job. It used to be sometimes days or weeks, or they were booked up. I remember, Neil, I've known you for nearly 20 years now, and you were always packed out in the audio suite in Birmingham. That's not always the case anymore, especially freelancers, not so much post houses themselves, but the freelancers themselves. They are waiting sometimes 2 or 3 months. Some have waited over a year for a job. And you have to factor that in as well. So the headline figures look really encouraging. Plus, we have to factor in that now we have a professional audience. So you would expect them to be at the higher end of the earning figures. If, for example, we're in a different sector and our previous survey had everybody from shop workers up to lawyers, and then we took everybody out and just kept the lawyers in, then we'd expect the number to change in terms of headline earning. It's just, and that's what happened. So I don't want to be the prophet of doom here, but although a headline is great, we had to mine into those numbers to really make them make sense for everybody.
And in the midst of the pressure of those uncertainties as well, it's very difficult for people to renegotiate rates when they really truly need to.
Yes, well, there is that factor as well. And I think nobody can get away with the fact that we've been asked to do more for less. I know that when I joined, the first post house I was in was Locomotion in Soho, and that was a commercials post house. And we did work for people like L'Oreal. We did it for all the beauty brands because our agents were at the agencies we worked for were people like Saatchi and Saatchi, DWP, and all those top agencies. When I first joined, we were getting $100,000 to make a TV commercial. By the time I left, we were getting 15, and that was in 3 years. And that's not only in the commercial sector, that's across the board. So you must know that the money used to get to, let's just say an actor's coming in to do some ADR or something. Everything's gone down across the board for all of us. They want it quicker, they want it cheaper, but they still want the same quality. And then what plays into that even more is because a lot of the producers at these companies are aware of what's been said about AI. They think all we have to do now is press a magic button and everything's perfect, that there's no skill involved anymore, so any monkey can do it. What also plays into that, sorry to sound like a depressive, is I wrote a similar article about it a week ago, about that the whole industry, both music and post, is built on a premise that there's plenty of us who really love doing our job. And so we got into this because we loved doing what we do. But we have to get paid to do it because we want to pay mortgages and cover their overheads for the business. But the trouble is the people we work for know that for every one of us they burn out, there's 10 behind us that will willingly do the job. Or for every one of us that says we won't do the job for that price, there's 10 behind us that will do it cheaper. That's where we are in the industry. So it's incredibly tough. The numbers about who wants to leave the industry right now are shocking. The numbers about people considering suicide are shocking. The numbers of people suffering from anxiety are shocking. It's a broken industry, and that's what this survey is also based within.
I mean, we ran a podcast a few episodes ago with Michelle Mills-Porter, who specialises in identifying and analysing what unique skills individuals have. Because one of the things that we've observed is that many creative professionals have found themselves beaten down to such a low ebb that they don't realise, or they've forgotten, what fantastic and transferable skills they possess. But Michelle can tell them, and we ran that great interview purely for the fact that we know of colleagues that are feeling vulnerable and alone and are either considering or have already left the industry. I always felt that the film industry was a little more precarious than broadcast television, but they've both changed so much. It would have been inconceivable when we entered the industry to believe that we wouldn't have a secure staff position of some kind, but instead, as freelancers, we'd possibly struggle to service a mortgage or feed and clothe our children.
I was just going to jump in here. I think most people that I know are doing other things simultaneously. I mean, most people in the sound industry, I think, are branching out and doing other stuff. I was just, before you came on, Russ, I was telling Neil I was out till 2 a.m. last night hanging lights in a theater because I've got other work going on in order to survive.
Sure. What doesn't help as well is because the industry has become so fragmented. Most of us, when I started in this industry, the 2 post houses I worked in, I was in a post house. There was 20 or 30 of us in a team. We'd hang out at the coffee machine and all that kind of stuff. And both post houses I worked in Soho, I was then at Berwick Post. There were people around. There were water cooler moments. Because we've become so fragmented, post-COVID and all the other things that have gone on, that there's no one to talk to. So we sometimes sit in our bedroom studio, our studio down the garden, mine's in the garden, mine's a converted garage, on my own. Most of the time, I don't see anyone. I don't have anyone to say, is this a reasonable conversation I've just had with that producer? I don't have any of those moments. I can go to my wife, of course, but that's not the same. So, sorry, and again, I don't want to sound depressing, but to compound into that, because we are self-employed and freelancers, they have no legal responsibility to us. They have no legal responsibility for our mental health. They have no legal responsibility for our physical health, no legal responsibility for our pension provision, none of that. So, guys, we are really on our own most of the time. I found the numbers that I reported last week. I'll just repeat them back and then we can move on. This is a Looking Glass survey. 64% are considering leaving the industry due to concerns about mental health. 32% have taken the step to do so. 30% reporting having thoughts of taking their own life in the past 12 months. That's a shocking statistic. 30% often feel lonely, up from 24% in 2022, and way above the national average of 8%. 63% said their work in film and TV has a negative effect on their mental health.
It's sobering, isn't it? I mean,
kind of COVID epidemic numbers.
When I was in the UK, we would do an awful lot of ADR. And that was a way that I would meet other people. There would be other dialogue editors who would come in. There would be directors who would come in. There would be the artists that would come in, etc., etc. And as you described, I have my studio and I will spend 8 to 10 hours a day just locked into that studio because I become quite obsessive about it. But it is a very lonely sort of furrow that you plough when you're doing that.
Yes.
Now, the jump in those having a pension, that's another area. It's one thing to be living for the now, but there's also making provision for the future. And the jump in those having a pension from 35% to 63% in your survey, well, that looks pretty dramatic. And you call this partly a targeting effect. For the working professional or the freelancer hearing 63%, what's the real message they should take away about industry-wide retirement security?
I was at a conference a few years ago with a guy called Laurent Janvier. He was one of the inventors of the internet, and in fact he regrets most of what he created now, but he was interestingly talking about the creative sector, and he said one of the biggest problems in the creative sector is there's no middle class. And we talked about vacation before we got onto this podcast today, and that's the problem. The middle class have pension provision, they have holiday pay, they have sick pay. We have none of that. So the key takeaway from the 63% number is there's 37% who haven't got any pension provision. And so they have 2 options. They either live in their old age poor or they carry on working till they die. That's the number. And bearing in mind that because we'd narrowed the focus of that survey, that number should have gone up because we were now approaching professionals. It sounds a positive number and it is encouraging. And one of my pet things is whenever I'm in forums and people go, I've got a spare £30 a month, what plugin should I buy next? And I say, don't buy a plugin, buy a pension. And I've just written an article this weekend about that. We're so enticed by the immediate things that will give us that quick dopamine hit. And yet we kind of ignore the really important things like backup software and pension provision and all those things that are really important to us as professionals. So my takeaway from that is what about the other 30% or more that still don't have pension provision?
And in healthcare, it's now healthcare, yeah, it's a direct cost in the survey for over 56% of respondents. And again, and I say as an American, particularly for colleagues in the U.S., in your view, has this become the biggest differentiator between a comfortable income and a precarious one, especially for freelancers?
I think it has, because when you speak to people who are working inside corporate America, one of the biggest parts of their package often that makes them determine whether they'll take the job or not is their healthcare provision. Because we have to remember that the healthcare provision normally when you work for an organisation, a corporate, is not only your healthcare provision but the provision for your entire family. And those are often in the packages. And when we look at healthcare provision in the survey, I think it had gone up by 14% in 5 years. And we see the kind of numbers that are coming out of America now in terms of the cost of what things are costing for the average American. Then you've got to factor in that the average American is going to have to earn more to stay on parity with those outside of America. Like a British person, I don't know what it's like in Australia, Neil, but whether you have healthcare there. But if you're in any country where you pay for healthcare, you have to factor that number in as well. So you have two options at that point. You put your rates up, which is okay if you're not working in a global economy, but we are now. And we've felt the effect of that, all of us at times, haven't we, where somebody's put a job out to a country where the standard of living or the cost of living is far less than it is in some countries like the UK or America. And so that's factored in as well. You can't just put your rates up because you've got to buy your healthcare now, because there could be somebody in another country that can undercut you, is equally as qualified.
In Australia, we have a half and half, which I suspect the NHS is going to go towards eventually. We have Medicare here, and you can go between both, which is rather like the UK.
Yeah, sure.
But I've been well served by the public health system here in Australia.
Yeah, and I speak with family and friends back in the States, and coming from the States, describing our situation in Australia, it sounds like a socialist utopia to them. It's pretty dire in the US for freelancers.
Sure, this is the point. You have to factor that in when you're factoring in these earning numbers.
Russ, you make a brilliant point that income data doesn't show utilisation. And how did your conversations with post-professionals, which informed the context, change the way you interpreted the raw numbers?
Well, it was that. It was that if we just assumed that everybody was working all the time, then the raw numbers tell one story. But then, as I say, when we've already brought this up during this conversation today, that you're talking with really established professionals who, one said to me that he was living off his savings just to get the family through the year. Others were taking other work. So they would be doing post-production, but then driving a delivery van for Amazon. Jason's mentioned hanging lights in a theatre. We have all had to come up with different ways of supplementing our income. In the UK, there's a thing called universal credit, which on face value, you think it's all for the unemployed. And yet you find out that when you look into the figures, 30% of people in UK on universal credit or using food banks, for example, are working people, proper working people. They have a job. In fact, two jobs. Both people in the house have jobs, but still they can't make enough money to make ends meet. So coming back to the utilisation number, if you're on a good rate, but you're only on a good rate for 6 months of the year, I think you need to extrapolate that number and say, well, what's my 12-month earning number? So if you earn, let's say, 100 grand for 6 months, that might be nice. Well, but if you need to earn 200 grand, then you've only got half your income for that year. And as I say, there's so many people looking for the same job all the time. So many good people. I saw one recently about 6 months ago, the guy that he did all the sound effects on all the Star Wars movies, and now is on income support. Those are the kind of challenges that are going on in our industry.
Crikey.
And I think this does, and again, speaking to age and experience, only 3.5% of the respondents were under 30. So the report's kind of painting a picture of a aging workforce. What, as someone who mentors and educates people, what would your message be to a young person today who's passionate about a career in audio? I mean, what do they look forward to?
I think they go for it. They say that when people do hiring in companies, they often hire people who are like themselves. Birds of a feather flock together. And there's a tendency, I think, to do that in our industry, that we kind of employ people who are like us. And so what can happen then is those younger in the industry don't get a chance to get on the ladder, but we're going to need them at some point. Okay, the first bit of good news, since we've been nearly half an hour into this, is I don't think our work is going away. Our work is changing, it's transforming. So we're going to still need professional sound editors. I don't think there's going to be a day where AI is going to do what we do. It's going to help us a lot. It's going to help with some of the stuff we don't like doing, like cleaning up audio or going through and face correcting 17 hours of TV footage and stuff like that. So there's some great stuff out there already doing that. But I still think you need the skill and the craft that comes from audio professionals. So what I would say to older people working in this industry, and it's hard to do when we've been talking about the climate we're in right now, is to consider how you pass this on, to consider how you mentor others. And part of the challenge there is because we've come out of the established post houses, where in the old days, whether it was in music or post, you'd have people in machine rooms. They'd come in as the tea boy or the tea girl, or they'd work on the front desk. I know a lot of people who started on the front desk in post houses in Soho, just welcoming people and giving them a coffee when they arrived. And at some point, one day, they needed somebody to sit in on a session. You know how it worked out. And over time, they went up the ladder. When we're working in isolation, that's less possible because you don't have the infrastructure to do it. But I think for us old ones, to say I'm 60 in June, I think it's essential that I pass it on, that I leave something behind and encourage them. And often the role of a mentor is not about the technical stuff. Anybody can do the technical stuff within reason. But as we know, it's about how you respond to other people in the room. That half of our job, I think, in post has always been, especially when you're doing things like ADR or somebody in the room with you, or you've got a producer in the room, is psychology. And you can't learn to shut up in a session if you're not in the session in the first place. And you can't learn to see how a top dialogue editor is working with a client in the room and stuff like that. So those are all the kind of things you pass on. I had a conversation last week. I shared it on Facebook with a load of my professional friends that I'd recently given a young person a chance to do a gig for me for a client. I introduced them to the client. Incredibly talented person, incredibly talented, but they kept not responding to emails. He eventually got the work and it was brilliant. But that bit where they didn't behave professionally, or as professionally as they should, is enough to make sure that their career either doesn't go well or stalls entirely. And as older people working in the industry, knowing we've made those mistakes ourselves, it's incumbent on us to help them grow. If you've got any downtime, then find somebody you can mentor and help them. That would be a good use of your time.
And it equally sounds like a healthy thing to do is to just contact colleagues and see if they're okay.
Oh, definitely. I got a text last night from a friend of mine who lives just 2 streets away, and he said, chance for a coffee this week? And I replied immediately and went, yes. Yeah. Because those coffees, if you're not careful, they happen twice a year instead of them happening once a week. It's just to be able to sit down and say, hey, what do you think about this? How would you feel about this? Am I losing my mind, or do you think this means this? All those kind of discussions you would have around the water cooler.
You sort of mentioned this and we kind of passed by it, but do you think this whole situation is a temporary thing, that this is a reset, the industry just sort of recalibrating?
I think there's elements of shrinkage going on just by the nature of technology is doing some of it. I think that most of the Amazons and the Netflix and the Apples of this world, I think they have overextended themselves in their belief about how much money they can actually make in this industry. And most of the people picking up the cost of that are the people down the food chain. And so they've now got to make a TV show cheaper and faster. I believe that what we have started to witness, and it's always been the case to some degree, but I think we're going through an industrial revolution in media creation. And when it goes from craft and artisan, just like it did in the real industrial revolution, then you get a lot of people at the bottom of the food chain who are just grunt workers, just doing stuff all day. And then it's like, how cheap can we make this and how fast can we make this? So there's some of that going on. But I still believe in the craft of our industry. I still celebrate this industry for some brilliant people, for shows like Adolescence that was on Netflix. I know the sound team on that. And when you see what they did and how they created that show, only people at the top of their game could have done it. They couldn't have been replaced, either by computers or by cheap people. It wasn't possible. And so as long as we continue to invest in and encourage and celebrate the craft of what we do, then I think that there's still room for growth. I think there's just natural things going on, which is to do with technology. I think we've over-egged the AI influence on our industry. I have spent 3 years playing with AI, working with AI, investing in AI to understand it. And I am of the mind that a huge proportion of AI isn't fit for purpose. And that's nothing to do with the ethics of it. Just take the ethics away for a moment and just what does it create at the end of the process? It's usually not very good. And I think the future of AI is personalized AI. It's not general. Because I think, and I've written about this that's coming out in a few weeks' time as well, is that AI, it works in generalizations. It works with large language models. So it says, okay, in the music world, you can put this plugin on and it will give you the best bass guitar based on 10,000 bass guitars it's learned from. But the truth is that I don't want it to sound like every other bass guitar. I want it to sound like how I make a bass guitar sound. Or how Neil makes dialogue sound. So what I mean by personalized AI, imagine if Pro Tools or DaVinci Resolve or whatever you're working in was able to interrogate all of the sessions you've ever created, your own personalized sessions. And I'm working with a piece of software at the moment called Little Bird, which isn't anything to do with our industry, but it's just a general, it's like a personal assistant. And it interrogates all my emails locally, nothing goes to the cloud. And it interrogates all the stuff I do. And then it can give me advice based on all the stuff it knows about me. So imagine if you had sessions like that. So it could know all about how Neil sets up a dialogue session. So effectively, he then gets his assistant back. But the assistant doesn't replace him. Because we don't want AI to do the audio work, so we have to do our accounts. We want AI to do our accounts so we can do the audio work. So AI has a place, but I think we've over-egged it because it creates news headlines. People love to talk about it taking over the world and all that kind of stuff. But I believe that AI will have a part to play, but it will have a positive part to play for each one of us. It will become a virtual assistant in our workflow, which will mean that we don't have to spend 2 hours fixing a session before we do the fun part of the work or the creative craft part of the work. That's got to be good for us because it means that we can then become more productive and maintain our quality without having to reduce our costs. So if we had AI doing 2 hours worth of setup work on a session, that means that's 2 hours we haven't got to bill for, but we could still bill it, but it wouldn't be our billable time. It would be the AI's billable time, which is virtually zero. So I think that's going to help too. So to answer your question, I think there is growth coming, but I think we're going through this, the whole industry, the whole media industry, I think is going through a correction stage where everybody thought that the media bubble was going to be bigger than it was. And so all these people like Amazon and all these other streaming services are trying to find ways to make money when they're not making money, obviously. So if you remember, Amazon, for example, now wants you to subscribe so you don't watch adverts during the shows. That's madness. They remember when we first got Amazon, it was so we didn't have to watch adverts because we were now on a streaming service. But now they can't make it pay, so they've now reintroduced adverts and want us to pay an additional subscription in addition to our subscription to do that. So they're all trying to make money, and unfortunately, we're the victims of them trying to keep their costs down.
Russ, we spoke earlier about the 2023 writers and actors strikes, and they were cited as a major shock to the system. And I'd also argue, we've spoken earlier, and these are my words, not yours or those of Production Expert, that many professionals have still not fully recovered from the financial damage inflicted on them by COVID. So beyond the immediate work stoppage that was caused by the strike, what do you think that moment revealed about the vulnerability of post-production professionals in that broader entertainment ecosystem?
Well, it kind of answers itself almost, doesn't it? I don't mean to be rude when I say that, but basically we are incredibly vulnerable. It doesn't take a lot to stop us, and we don't have any kind of redundancy built in a sense. And this comes back to the point that Jason made earlier about the hanging of lights or whatever stuff we have to do. There is no buffer built in on many occasions. So if a strike happens, shutdown happens, and we can't work, there's nothing can happen. And so we're stuck. And I know many people at that time were really struggling. And in fact, COVID had the opposite effect for many people. Even though it changed the nature of the work, many people were working, but working from home. I think that was less of an impact than the strikes in some way. The strikes just came off the back of COVID, which didn't help. So we are an incredibly vulnerable industry. And that's why I want to reiterate that we have to have contingency in place. We have a saying on the Experts, which is everybody should have an F-off fund. It's the amount of money you need to tell your boss to F off. That's where that saying comes from. And we've calculated it's between 3 and 6 months. So here's the other challenge. If you've already got a challenge with income, how do you build up cash for the quieter times?
Exactly.
And so we have to find ways of creating contingency. We have to find ways of protecting ourselves from these shocks, which will happen and can happen again.
I mean, we had an interview with production sound mixer Simon Hayes, and he has a martial arts studio that he runs, and he's top of the line production mixer. He has an entire other business that he runs.
Yet Simon is top of the tree.
Yeah, well, I don't know that he has to, but he does just for to be prudent.
Yeah, I was going to say I've never seen that guy not working. Really, really generous as well. And that's interesting, isn't it? I think generosity is always good. Like you guys doing this podcast or whatever, is that the more we can show generosity across our industry, I think it's a contagious thing. I heard somebody say the other day, we shouldn't be worried about sharing secrets because there are no secrets. Because Neil could tell everybody how he does a dialogue edit, but it doesn't mean they're going to do it like Neil, because it's the way Neil does it that people pay for.
I remember a saying that you taught to me, Russ, which was, just because you fall down, that doesn't make me a taller person. I think it was...
Yeah, it isn't mine. I can't lay claim to it, but yeah, just because someone falls over doesn't make you taller.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't rejoice in the suffering of others. We should do everything we can, especially those of us who have influence, to make things better for everybody. I've never got this expression, where people say, well, I had a hard childhood, so it didn't do me any harm, but it's rubbish. Just because I had a hard time, my job should be then to make sure nobody else has a hard time.
Yeah.
If I've had a hard time the last 3 years in the industry, I should do everything in my power now to encourage people to get pensions, to do all of those things. It's so essential.
You're also the managing director of Sociotech, which is a highly successful global marketing agency for the audio technology sector, and you work with some of the industry's biggest and most familiar brands. What do you think the headline of a survey taken today of pro audio companies might say compared to 5 years ago?
One of the things I've said to some of the brands I advise to is that they'll call me and say, the sales aren't as good as we hoped they would be. And I'll say, well, I've just come off a call from a guy that said to me, he can either buy this plugin this month or he can pay his mortgage. Which one do you think he's going to choose? And so this industry itself is going through correction in terms of the gear side of the industry. The gear side of the industry, because of COVID, went I think we had 70% growth every year. It was insane. It was insane. The correction didn't happen the year before, but speaking to some people who I respect greatly at the top of these brands, we all said it's going to come at some point. The correction has to happen. So we have an oversaturated market of plugins. We have an oversaturated market of gear. When somebody says to me sometimes, which audio interface should I buy? I'll go, any of them. In the 1980s when I started this, most of the stuff was pretty rubbish and you had to spend a lot of money to get something good. Like if you were doing location sound, you needed to buy a Nagra, or equipping your post house, Neil, you had to buy a Studer. And these days you can buy a £300 interface, which sounds as good as any of those things that we paid $5,000 for. I think you bought a TC off me. Do you remember, Neil, when we had the post house in London?
I do indeed. Yeah, TC 6000.
Had that box in the day, I think it was about £6,000.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Do you know what? I've still got it.
Yeah, you could buy a reverb. You could buy a plugin now that's £300 to do the same thing. This is the point I'm making. The industry is incredibly oversaturated. Costs have dropped greatly. And so I think that people making the gear need to be mindful of the people they're selling to. I talk about marketing empathy a lot with brands I work with. I say you need to understand that when you send out that mail saying buy this, that email is one of many things that have hit their life that day. Their mom could have gone into hospital. Their child could have vomited. It could be your message is just one of 100 that are hitting their life that day. So don't get too hung up if they don't read your email or buy your product. Manufacturers need to look at these numbers as well that we've been talking about today and say, this is the industry we're selling to now. We need to understand that these people have a lot of priorities and it's not always buying your gear.
All right, very briefly, we'll ask this last question here. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how the industry values post-production and audio work specifically, not just rates, but the entire project structure, what would it be? I guess what would propel things forward in a positive way based on everything we were discussing?
I think what would propel things forward even now is to understand that even with all the technology we have today, even all the advances in AI, all the advances in the computer stuff, to make really good TV or movies takes very special, gifted people. It's a craft. It's a craft that can't be replaced by, although we use the term industry a lot, it's almost anathema for me because it's not an industry. It's just a collection of incredibly gifted, passionate craftspeople who make some of the things actually that take us out of the darkness. That when you watch a great show, we were watching a show, my wife and I last night, with a bottle of wine and just laughing, and to be able to make people laugh, or to be able to tell a story that makes you think about the way you've been towards somebody, even drama or documentary shows, to be able to do that is incredibly hard. I often say to some people when I was working in post, I would say it takes a lot of hard work to make something look natural. Which is almost a paradox, but it's true, isn't it? That when you make these shows, to make them look really meaningful is really hard. And so if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to say, don't forget that there's a craft behind doing this well, and it can't be replaced by machines or computers. And when you realise that, you value it as something precious, and you want to protect it, and you want to grow it, and you want to celebrate it. And I think we should do more about celebrating, not just award ceremonies, but all the time. We should celebrate great shows and great TV and film, because it's a human achievement in creative terms as impressive as getting Man on the Moon.
I say to first-time directors sometimes when they're worried about how it's going, I tell them the story about the producer in America, who, even if he went to a stinker of a premiere, he would stand and he would cheer and he would clap his hands. And it may be apocryphal, but one day one person said to him, "Why on earth do you do that?" And he said, "You obviously don't understand what it takes to make a feature film."
That would be a great TV show, a bit like The Apprentice, where we give people cameras and mics and say, go out and make shows for us and see how good they are.
All right, I'm going to ask you this last question. You asked readers directly, do you feel better or worse off than 5 years ago? And based on everything that you've seen and heard while compiling the report, what's your personal answer to that question, Russ?
I'm going to cheat here. About the same, I think. I think we've all worked. I think we've worked harder to stay in the same place. So you could call that worse off.
Okay.
So yeah.
Russ, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you on behalf of the 7 million of us in the industry who continue to enjoy the free access to high-quality, relevant content that your Production Expert website and your blogs provide us with.
Thank you for having me.
The link to the Production Expert survey, Russ Hughes' own website, and his social media links are all on today's show notes page, along with his contact details. Also on the show page are contact details for Jason and me as experienced and enthusiastic dialogue editors for hire, my work as a sound producer, helping ambitious filmmakers by acting as a consultant and overseeing their film soundtracks from pre-production right through to post-production, as well as a link to the live online coaching sessions and workshops that we run on sound design and DaVinci Resolve, which we like to think are relevant and useful for all craft creatives such as directors and picture editors, and not just sound professionals.
It's our goal with this podcast series to educate listeners from all backgrounds about the underappreciated, wider role sound plays in life as well as in the film and television industry, and to also develop a sound language and style of dialogue that filmmakers can use to more easily communicate with each other about sound for moving pictures. If you like what you've heard today, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave comments about what would be helpful to you and your work and who you'd like to hear from on the show. And lastly, as ever, thanks for listening.
The Apple and Biscuit Show is written, produced and presented by Jason Nicholas and Dr. Neil Hillman. It is edited and mixed by Jason Nicholas in our Sydney studio.
Apple and Biscuit Show.